Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm going to walk you through a brief presentation on infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm going to cover multiple angles from the municipalities and provincial governments, federal governments, just the overall flavor of what happens with capital investment. So I'm going to cover the infrastructure gap. I'll talk about how you make key investments. I'll talk about NPV, which is net present value, just to give you accounting 101, finance 101 introduction to it. And I'll actually give you a sample of how an NPV project works or calculation works. Now you're going to hear a lot of words talked about, basically infrastructure gap. Really what that means is the municipalities look at the overall maintenance and capital required to run their jurisdictions. Then they look at the amount of money that they're going to put in each year. So the amount that it costs to replace it and the amount they're putting in, that's the difference between the gap. Now what's happening is a lot of the infrastructure is 30-40 years old, and gradually they have to replace some of it. A lot of that building happened a lot in the 50s, 40s and stuff like that after the war, and gradually what's happening is over time there hasn't been a big effort to put a lot more money in replacement, and that's what you're hearing the discussions now on. Let's talk about the Liberal plan in general, and this will lead into the further calculations. The Liberals' plan is they want to invest more in infrastructure. Okay, we already had the Build Canada Fund. We also had the gas tax fund. Okay, and then it's up to the provinces to match that and the municipalities to do things as well. That's never discussed. So the second thing that you want to do, you can throw $10 billion at a problem. Won't fix it unless you have oversight and you have proper analysis done on business cases. That's not something that seems to be clearly understood with the Liberals. The second point that they're talking about doing is maybe asking the Canadian Pension Investment Board, which is it has oversight itself, it's independent of government, to kind of steer themselves into making those investments. Well, CPP has to make investments that make sense on the proper returns. Let's talk about issues that face infrastructure. In Ontario's case is a good example. They've over budgeted P3, so a lot of problems could happen with a P3. P3 means that if you don't have transparencies in the deals, if you don't have proper oversight in the cost management, then you're going to have issues. Now the second thing that you need to do is you need to look at return on investment. So when I'm looking at that $1.2 billion transit project, what am I expecting in ridership? What is the cost of maintenance? And what is my projections on my cash flow over time? That has to be looked at. The second thing is I have to expand something that's going to drive jobs overall. Construction projects are typically temporary. They don't do anything over the long haul because you're going to replace those jobs. Now what's going to happen is you need to be able to support exports. Exports is a key driver in Canada, and we need to be able to support that, and that's where we're going to get into further discussions down the road about pipelines, roads and stuff. I'll talk about trade barriers too. Provinces themselves are causing some issues in terms of how we make labor mobility issues that cause the rise cost of projects. We'll talk about non-union and union contracts that can also raise the cost of those projects up. We can also talk about provincial policies which get completely ignored in this. If you got a broken arbitration process or a broken reform system for salaries and pensions, then what's going to happen? That's going to add in the cost. That's going to add in the cost of government for provincial or municipal governments, which then reduces the amount they can spend on infrastructure. I'm bringing out exports here because it's critical. They're about 530 billion, but they're growing at a 5 to 10% growth. But we need capacity. As much as Justin Trudeau and Kathleen Wynne talk about things, it's the economy that drives tax revenue for the government. So we need more investments in pipelines. We need more investment in rail. We need more investment in ports, more expansion of ports like Sydney. Maybe even looking at Thunder Bay. Maybe even looking at inland ports like Winnipeg. We need to kind of have an integrated strategy how we're going to provide that. That's where you're going to see a combination of efforts happen. Let's talk about transit. This is a big area, and transit's one that you get into either above rail, bus services, or you get below ground. There's a lot of issues that go into that, especially when you start getting in risk management, because once you start digging and burying subways, you don't know what you're going to get into that, and that can add in more cost. You're also dependent on ridership, so if you're not going to get the ridership, those lines can lose money. Here's a good example. The Ontario government built the Pearson train run. It has not made money. The ridership's been low, so there's a whole issue about feasibility. I just want to walk you through a quick example. Now, this example is based on a 5.5% interest rate. So what net present value does, it takes a look at projects over a long haul by looking at the outlay, looking at the inflow of cash, that's your revenue and CCA, which is capital cost allowance. Then what it's looking at is your operating expenses each year. So what you're doing at time zero, this is the amount of money is, but when am I going to recover that investment? In this particular case, if I went to a low ridership here, you're seeing in this particular case, this project would probably lose 500 million over a period of 15 years. Now you could adjust the numbers there, but the real reality is am I going to get the ridership, and how am I going to keep control of my maintenance cost? I have not seen very many projects that are not borderline in terms of success. So it's easy to build projects, but are you really getting maximum dollars? This presentation was designed to educate people to understand that you just don't throw money at infrastructure. You just don't build transit projects. You have to legitimately look at what makes the most sense. Thank you.